There's a certain sound a front door makes when someone's carrying too much anger, sharp, final, like they want the whole world to hear it. That was the sound that shattered the quiet of my Thursday evening, right as I was pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee in the old kitchen I'd called home for nearly 50 years. I barely had time to set down the mug before the storm arrived. My son, now, I suppose I should call him by his new name for this story, Michael, marched through my entryway like he owned the place. Gone was the gentle boy who used to run home after Little League games. In his place was a man I barely recognized, face red, suit wrinkled, hands balled into fists. "Dad, I need you to listen. This is urgent. You have to sell this house and give me what's mine," he blurted, skipping any greeting. No hello. No apology for bursting in unannounced. Just demands. The desperation in his eyes made my heart ache more than his words did. I tried to keep my voice calm, gesturing for him to take a seat in the kitchen. "Michael, why don't we sit down and talk about?" "I don't want to sit. And I don't need coffee. I want answers. You've got this big old house, and you're alone. Why hold on to it? Why not do the right thing and help me and Sarah?" His voice cracked, but not with emotion, just impatience. Sarah. His wife. They'd been struggling, but I never imagined he'd come to this. I steadied myself against the back of the chair, careful not to show how much his words hurt. "Son, this house, it's all I have left. Your mother and I built a life here. It's more than bricks and paint." He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "You're getting older, Dad. What do you need a 5-bedroom place for? Why can't you just let go?" For a second, I saw the boy he'd once been, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You know what, Michael?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, but every word was solid. "I think you should leave." He stared at me, mouth half open. Maybe he expected me to argue, to beg, to give in. But I just pointed at the door. "And don't come back until you're ready to talk to me like a son again." He slammed his fist on the counter, making the coffee cup rattle. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Just remember this when you're alone and no one's left to help you." I watched through the window as he stormed out, got into his new Dodge Charger, and sped away down Willow Avenue, tires screeching in the dusk. The house felt cold, hollow, like someone had pulled the soul right out of it. I walked over to the mantel. The photos were all there. Michael's graduation. His wedding. The camping trip where he caught his first fish. I traced the edge of the frame, remembering the way his face used to light up when he'd accomplished something. Remembering the days before everything turned complicated and sharp. How did we get here? I'd helped him through college, 4 years at Michigan State, tuition paid in full. Gave him the down payment on his first home, and a business loan when his cafe dreams started wobbling. The numbers added up to more than I wanted to admit. Gifts, not loans, because that's what fathers do. Yet, now, I was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of his next payout. Night settled over the neighborhood, and the street lights on Birch Lane flickered on. I sat in my wife's old recliner. She'd passed 5 years ago, but I still talked to her sometimes when the house was quiet. I could almost hear her saying, "Give him time, Ben. Kids find their way back if you let them." But tonight, that hope felt far away. All I could feel was the ache of a heart that had given everything, and the fear that it might never be enough. As I sat there, the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7 times, steady, dependable, echoing through the empty house. I thought about what tomorrow might bring. Maybe an apology. Maybe another fight. Or maybe, just maybe, a new start. But deep down, I knew that whatever came next, I'd have to be ready. This was my home. My life. And I wasn't going to give it up, not without a fight. The next morning broke cold and gray over Birch Lane, sunlight just barely filtering through the clouds. I tried to settle into my usual routine: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, a mug of strong black coffee, but everything felt off. The house was quieter than usual, even for a widower's home. My wife, Linda, used to fill every room with music and the soft humming of her favorite tunes. Now, her absence echoed alongside the bitter taste of Michael's words from last night. I found myself staring at the phone on the kitchen wall, half hoping it might ring with some kind of olive branch. But there was nothing. Just the tick of the old kitchen clock and the distant rumble of a city garbage truck rolling down the street. Instead, I tried to focus on the small things. I trimmed the hedges out front, raked some early leaves from the big maple tree, and checked the mail, mostly bills and a postcard from my sister in Florida, wishing me warmth and sunshine I could hardly imagine today. But just as I was about to head back inside, the phone finally rang, its shrill cry cutting through the morning air like a fire alarm. I hurried over, heart pounding, hoping it was Michael. Instead, I heard a calm, measured voice. "Mr. Bradley? This is Samuel Cohen, your attorney. I need you to call me immediately. It's important, and it's about your son." The air left my lungs all at once. My lawyer had never called me out of the blue, not in the 15 years he'd been helping me keep my affairs in order. My hands shook as I dialed his number, feeling an icy dread that seemed to settle in my bones. He answered on the second ring. "Ben, thank you for getting back to me. Listen, I don't want to alarm you, but Michael called my office yesterday." "What for?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "He was asking about your will. Whether your house and assets are going to him, or if there's a split with your daughter, Abby." Samuel paused, as if weighing every word. "He also inquired about what it would take to contest the will. Specifically, what would happen if someone claimed you were not of sound mind when you made it." My grip tightened on the receiver. For a long moment, I said nothing, just listening to the hum of the line and the faraway sound of traffic outside my window. "Ben," Samuel continued gently, "I know this is difficult. But you need to be careful. I think your son is planning something. Don't agree to meet with him alone for a while, not until we know more." I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. When I hung up, the kitchen seemed to spin. Michael, my own flesh and blood, was plotting to take everything from me, and might even be planning to declare me incompetent to get there faster. Suddenly, the knock at the door startled me. My granddaughter, Madison, Abby's oldest, stood there, holding a plate of cookies and wearing a worried expression. "Grandpa, are you okay? Mom said you seemed down." Forcing a smile, I invited her in, grateful for the distraction. We sat at the kitchen table, nibbling on sugar cookies while she told me about her third-grade spelling bee and how she'd finally learned to ride her bike without training wheels. Her innocent joy was a lifeline. After she left, I walked into my study, pulled out a stack of old photo albums, and tried to lose myself in memories of better days, birthdays, Christmas mornings, vacations at Lake Erie, fishing trips where Michael used to beam with pride holding up his first catch. But the reality kept crowding in, refusing to let me rest. My son wasn't the boy in those photographs anymore. By late afternoon, as the shadows grew long, the phone rang again. This time, it was Michael. His voice sounded different, calmer, softer, almost contrite. "Dad," he said, "about yesterday. I'm sorry. I lost my temper. Sarah's been stressed, and things are hard for us right now. But I shouldn't have taken it out on you." Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part remembered Samuel's warning, the way Michael had pressed about the will. "Maybe we could meet up, Dad? Dinner? My treat at Mariner's Bistro, 7 o'clock. Let's put all this behind us." The offer sounded genuine, but now everything felt like a test. I hesitated, trying to read between the lines. But in the end, the part of me that still believed in my son won out. "All right, Michael. 7 at Mariner's." After he hung up, I stood in the hallway, staring at my reflection in the old mirror. I saw a man older than he felt, tired but not beaten. Tonight, I told myself, would show the truth, whether there was hope for us, or if my lawyer's suspicions were right. As the clock in the hall ticked toward evening, I chose my best suit, a charcoal gray, freshly pressed. Linda always said it made me look like someone important. I wanted to face whatever came next with dignity. I splashed on a little aftershave, checked my wallet for enough cash to pay just in case, and paused by Linda's photo on the mantel. "Wish me luck, sweetheart," I whispered. "I might need it." And with that, I stepped out into the cool Ohio twilight, heading for a dinner that I feared might change everything, one way or another. It's strange, the way your heart can both hope and brace for disaster at the same time. As I drove across town to Mariner's Bistro, a cozy little place set on the edge of the Hudson River, my mind replayed Samuel's warning over and over. But hope dies hard in the heart of a father, and I kept thinking maybe, just maybe, Michael meant what he said on the phone. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, the city coming alive with its usual Friday evening energy. I parked my old Buick by the marina and walked in, the familiar bell above the door chiming a welcome. Inside, the glow from the string lights made everything look softer, almost magical. But the tightness in my chest refused to fade. Michael was already there, seated at a table by the window. His wife, Sarah, was with him, a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael stood up and pulled out my chair, all charm and manners. "Dad, you look great," he said, as if the last 24 hours hadn't happened. I tried to return his smile, noticing the fine lines etched deep into his forehead, the anxious glances he kept sneaking at Sarah. She was dressed in her usual impeccable style, but even she seemed tense, her hands fidgeting with her napkin, her smile a little too practiced. We started with polite conversation. Michael asked about Abby and the grandkids, about the garden out back and whether I'd fixed that old gutter that kept coming loose. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. The waitress arrived, and before I could say anything, Michael ordered for all of us. "We'll have the house merlot, Dad's favorite, and 3 of the chef's special steaks." He looked at me and grinned. "I remembered how much you loved the steak here with that peppercorn sauce." Sarah poured the wine, her hand steady, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "To family," she said, raising her glass. "To second chances," Michael added, clinking his glass against mine. I forced a toast and took a careful sip. The Merlot was smooth, familiar. Yet I found myself watching them more closely than ever before, each gesture, every glance. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something lurking behind their newfound warmth? We talked about old times, Michael's soccer games, Sarah's big promotion last spring, even the time Linda and I took them all camping upstate. The food arrived, beautifully plated, steaming and aromatic. Michael insisted on serving me the biggest cut, ladling the peppercorn sauce himself. He watched me as I took the first bite, as if my approval still mattered. And maybe in some twisted way it did. The steak was perfect, tender, rich, just as I remembered. But I ate slowly, careful not to let my guard down, careful to watch Sarah and Michael as much as I watched my plate. The meal wore on. They kept my wine glass full, kept steering the conversation to happy memories and hopeful plans. Sarah talked about wanting to move to a bigger house, how much a little extra help would mean for their future. Michael nodded along, his eyes a little too bright, his words too rehearsed. As dessert arrived, a chocolate torte, Linda's favorite, Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Dad, about what I said yesterday. I was out of line. You've done so much for me. For both of us. I just wanted to say thank you, and maybe ask for a clean slate." Sarah reached for my hand, her touch soft and cold. "We want to be closer to you. Maybe help around the house, take care of things when you need it." My heart ached. It would have been so easy to fall for their act. But Samuel's warning echoed in my mind, reminding me what was at stake. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. But you two know I can still take care of myself. And as for the house, your mother and I built that together. It's not just a building. It's everything." Michael's smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. He quickly recovered. "Of course, Dad. Of course. I just want you to know you can trust us." We finished the meal in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When the check came, Michael waved away my hand. "My treat, remember?" As we stood up to leave, Sarah hugged me a little tighter than usual, whispering, "We really do love you, Ben." I stepped out into the night, the marina lights glittering on the river, a soft breeze brushing against my face. I should have felt better, but something inside me twisted tighter than ever. I drove home in silence, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the oldies station playing softly. My mind kept replaying every moment from dinner, every word, every gesture, every careful refill of my glass. Back in the safety of my living room, I collapsed into Linda's old recliner, the house dark except for the reading lamp beside me. The taste of wine lingered on my tongue, the warmth fading from my cheeks. That's when the first wave of nausea hit. At first, I thought it was the heaviness of the meal. I stood, stretched, tried to shake it off. But the feeling only grew worse, stabbing pains in my stomach, dizziness, sweat breaking out across my brow. My knees buckled, and I barely made it to the kitchen sink before I was retching, pain racking my body in waves. Through the haze, I remembered Samuel's warning, the way Michael and Sarah had watched me eat, the insistence on the peppercorn sauce. I stumbled to the phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. "My name is Ben Bradley. I think I've been poisoned." By the time the ambulance arrived, I could barely stand. The pain in my stomach felt like someone had twisted a knife inside me, and every attempt to move brought fresh waves of nausea. I remember the paramedics, 2 young women, both calm and efficient, guiding me onto a stretcher and promising I'd be all right. The world spun and tilted, blurring the lines of my kitchen, the memories, and the quiet grief I'd carry for years. The sirens seemed distant, like they belonged to another world. My mind drifted as we sped down Main Street toward Riverbend Medical Center, passing the familiar landmarks of my life: Daly's Grocery, the public library, the church where Linda and I had renewed our vows on our 25th anniversary. I felt old and small, a man reduced to a body in the back of an ambulance, but deep down, some part of me burned with a fierce, stubborn will to survive. Inside the emergency room, bright lights and beeping machines swallowed me up. Nurses spoke in clipped voices. A doctor, a tall man with a Boston accent and gentle hands, told me they needed blood tests, and started in 4 for fluids and medication. I tried to explain what happened, slurring words, but he understood more than I expected. "You think you were poisoned?" he repeated, his eyes sharp and kind. "Don't worry, Mr. Bradley. We'll figure this out." The hours crawled by, each one longer than the last. Between bouts of pain and half-dreams, I heard snippets of conversation, nurses talking about toxins, a detective on the phone, a technician asking for another blood sample. The haze wouldn't lift, and my thoughts kept circling back to Michael and Sarah, their smiles, the carefully chosen wine, the strange heaviness of the meal. When I finally woke, sunlight was seeping through the hospital blinds. The pain had dulled to an ache. My mouth felt like sandpaper. A nurse came in, checked my pulse, and scribbled notes onto a chart. "Good morning, Mr. Bradley. The doctor will be in soon. You're a lucky man. Most folks wouldn't have called for help so quickly." I tried to sit up, head spinning. "Did they find out what happened?" She gave me a gentle look, like someone used to bad news. "The doctor will explain. Just rest." A few minutes later, Dr. Wallace returned, this time with a file in his hand and a serious set to his jaw. He closed the door and pulled up a chair. "Mr. Bradley, we found a toxin in your system, a plant-based poison called abrin. It's very rare and very dangerous. But you got here in time. With some luck and continued monitoring, you should make a full recovery. The words felt heavy, unreal. You mean someone tried to kill me? He nodded. Based on your story and the test results, yes. You need to speak to the police. This isn't just a medical issue, it's a crime. I sat there for a long time, letting it sink in. All those years, all the love, all the sacrifices, and now my own son had tried to end my life for a chance at my house, my savings, my legacy. I thought about Linda, her laughter, her patience, her belief that family meant everything, and wondered what she would say if she could see us now. Detective Helen Alvarez arrived an hour later. She was younger than I expected, with sharp brown eyes and a quiet authority. She pulled up a plastic chair, turned on her recorder, and asked me to tell everything from the beginning. So I did. I started with the argument in my living room. Michael's demands, his anger, the way he'd called me selfish for holding on to my home. I told her about Samuel's warning, Michael's questions about my will and whether Abby was included, and the dinner invitation that felt too perfectly timed. I described Mariner's Bistro, the wine, the food, Michael's insistence that I try the sauce, Sarah's constant attention to my plate and glass. I told Detective Alvarez about the pain that started after I got home, the way it felt like my insides were tearing apart, the fear that I wouldn't survive the night. She listened to every word, her expression never wavering. When I finished, she closed her notebook and nodded. We'll need your medical records, and we'll be sending officers to the restaurant. Mr. Bradley, I'm sorry this happened. But you did the right thing calling for help. Her words gave me a strange comfort, as if by surviving I'd regained a bit of the control Michael tried to steal. Before she left, I asked, "What happens next?" She looked me in the eye. "If your son and daughter-in-law are responsible, they'll be arrested. There will be charges. Attempted murder is serious. You're safe here, Mr. Bradley. We won't let them hurt you again." After she was gone, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the first time I held Michael in my arms, the little boy with the big dreams and crooked grin. I wondered where that boy had gone, and why the man he became saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his next paycheck. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion washing over me like a tide. I was alive. I'd outlasted the poison. But the battle for my family, and my future, was just beginning. After Detective Alvarez left my hospital room, the rest of the day passed in a blur of nurses, monitors, and restless memories. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, that mix of forced warmth and cold calculation. My stomach twisted at the thought. My own son had tried to poison me for the sake of an early inheritance. All those years I'd spent worrying over his scraped knees, his homework, his heartaches, and now he was willing to throw it all away for a shortcut to a bigger bank account. By the following morning, Dr. Wallace declared me well enough to move out of the ICU, but insisted I stay another day for observation. "No risks, Mr. Bradley," he said, patting my arm. "You were lucky. Some folks never make it to the phone, let alone the ER." When I was finally discharged that evening, it felt surreal to step outside again. The hospital air was sharp and cold, the city lights flickering through the trees as I caught a taxi home. My house on Birch Lane had never felt so lonely. Even the silence was different now, a heavy, haunted hush that seemed to linger in every room. But there wasn't time for self-pity. I called Samuel, my lawyer, and arranged to meet him at his downtown office the next day. "Bring everything," he said. "We'll lock things down. And Ben, I'm sorry, but we'll make sure your wishes are followed." The next morning, I drove down Main Street, feeling both older and tougher than I had a week ago. Samuel's office was quiet, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and old paper. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a look of genuine concern. "Ben, are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, once I told him everything. "Excluding Michael completely, it's a big step." I nodded, my mind clearer than it had been in years. A son who tries to kill his father doesn't deserve a dime. Not after this. He drew up the new will, every page spelling out in careful legal language that all of my estate, my home, my savings, the little cabin at Lake Geneva, even the trust funds, would go to Abby, my daughter, and her children. Michael was mentioned only to be specifically excluded. Samuel made sure there was no loophole, no back door. Michael may try to contest it, Samuel said. But with the police report and hospital records, no judge will ever side with him. The satisfaction was bittersweet. I signed the documents with a steady hand, feeling the weight of each pen stroke. In that moment, I thought about Linda, how she always told me to protect the family legacy, to make sure what we'd built went to those who'd honor it. The rest of the day I spent gathering papers, updating accounts, and making calls to everyone who needed to know. Abby came by in the afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed, but her hug was the warmest I'd felt since Linda passed. "Dad, I still can't believe Michael would do this," she whispered, holding on to me like she was afraid I'd disappear. "He always seemed lost, but never cruel." "Sometimes people change," I said quietly. "Or maybe we just start seeing them clearly for the first time." News of the arrest broke later that night. Michael and Sarah were picked up at their house in Millfield, handcuffed on the front porch while the neighbors watched. The local news ran the story, splashing our family's pain across every screen. "Local man accused of poisoning father for inheritance." My phone rang with reporters, old friends, and even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in decades. I ignored every call. The shame was almost as heavy as the relief. Detective Alvarez called to tell me the court had denied Michael and Sarah bail. They were considered a flight risk. "You're safe, Mr. Bradley," she assured me. "But you may be called to testify." I spent the next weeks preparing for the trial, meeting with Samuel and the prosecutor, reviewing every detail. Abby helped where she could, organizing my files and making sure I ate. Some nights, I caught her crying in the kitchen, staring at a photo of her and Michael as kids, not quite able to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The house filled with the sound of my grandchildren, Madison and her little brother Henry, coloring at the dining table, watching cartoons, bringing a burst of life back into these old walls. In the quiet moments, I wondered if I would ever really heal from the betrayal, or if I'd always feel this dull ache when I thought about my son. The trial date finally arrived, and the courthouse loomed gray and imposing as Abby and I walked inside together. She squeezed my hand. "We're with you, Dad. Whatever happens." I smiled, feeling Linda's strength in both of us. No matter how hard it was, justice had to be served. The courthouse that day felt colder than I remembered, as if the past weeks had wrung every drop of warmth from its stone walls. Abby and I waited on a worn wooden bench outside courtroom 3, our hands linked tight, either of us saying much. We both watched the double doors, bracing ourselves for the moment they'd open and we'd be called inside. Michael was already there, seated beside Sarah at the defense table. They looked smaller than I'd ever seen them, pale, tired, wearing borrowed suits that hung loose on their frames. Michael didn't look up when I entered. I could barely recognize the son I'd raised, the hopeful kid who once dreamed of building airplanes, now hiding behind lawyers and cold silence. The prosecutor, a determined woman named Angela Brooks, laid out the case with a kind of precision I'd only seen from engineers. She described Michael's financial troubles, his visits to Samuel's office with questions about my will, and his desperation after losing money in a failed business venture. The evidence was clear. Michael and Sarah had conspired to poison me, planning every detail from the restaurant reservation to the carefully prepared meal. I took the stand as the primary witness. The oath felt heavy on my tongue, a vow to tell the truth that I took as seriously as anything in my life. Angela guided me gently through my story, Michael's angry demand in my living room, Samuel's warning, the suspiciously timed dinner at Mariner's Bistro, and the sudden agony that followed. My son insisted I eat the steak with the special sauce. I told the jury, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. Sarah kept my wine glass full. They made sure I tried everything. Angela submitted my hospital records, proof of the Abrin poisoning, and Detective Alvarez testified to Michael's internet search history, his will-related questions, and the surveillance footage from the restaurant. Michael's defense lawyer tried to cast doubt on everything. He argued that I was confused, that maybe the poisoning was accidental, that perhaps the restaurant's kitchen was to blame. He even suggested that my age made me prone to memory lapses, to exaggeration. But the facts held firm, and I answered every question, every challenge, with the calm of a man who had already survived the worst betrayal of his life. At one point, Michael looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dad, I never meant," he started, but his lawyer quickly silenced him. The courtroom was silent for a moment, heavy with things left unsaid. Sarah never met my gaze. Her hands twisted in her lap, her face pale as paper. After 2 long days, the jury retired to deliberate. Abby and I waited together in the corridor, watching the clock's slow hands. She leaned on my shoulder, tears running quietly down her cheeks. "How did we end up here?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. When the jury returned, every person in the courtroom seemed to hold their breath. The foreman read the verdict, each word landing with the weight of a sledgehammer. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendants, Michael Bradley and Sarah Bradley, guilty." I heard Abby sob beside me, relief, grief, and exhaustion all at once. Michael slumped in his chair, shoulders shaking. For a moment, I saw a flash of the boy he'd once been, scared and lost, and my heart broke all over again. The judge sentenced them each to 15 years in state prison, with a possibility of parole after 10. They were led away in handcuffs, heads bowed, their futures erased by one night of greed and betrayal. Outside, the sky was clearing. Abby and I stood on the courthouse steps, blinking in the pale sunlight. The world seemed new, quieter, full of the echoes of what we'd lost and the faintest promise of what we still had. "Now what, Dad?" Abby asked, her voice small but hopeful. "No," I said, feeling the burden begin to lift. "We tried to heal. We moved forward. That's what your mother would have wanted." We walked home together, arm in arm, determined to reclaim what we could from the wreckage. Birch Lane looked softer that afternoon, the dogwoods blooming white and pink along the curb. For the first time in months, I let myself believe there could still be a future worth fighting for. The days after the trial passed slowly, each sunrise feeling lighter than the last. I'd spent so long waiting for justice, for the world to feel right again, that I hardly recognized the peace that finally settled over Birch Lane. It wasn't a joyful peace. It was the quiet, sober calm that comes after a long storm, a kind of relief mixed with the ache of old wounds. Abby visited every day, bringing Madison and Henry along to fill my house with noise and laughter. Their drawings soon covered the refrigerator, and their giggles echoed down the hallway, driving out the memories of those lonely, uncertain nights. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at Michael's old bedroom door, remembering the child he'd once been, the dreams he'd shared, the endless questions, the shy hugs before bedtime. My heart would squeeze tight, but I never let myself wish things were different. Not anymore. Acceptance had replaced hope. I loved my son, but I couldn't save him from himself. A month after the sentencing, I sat at Samuel's office, signing the final set of documents that would transfer everything I owned to Abby and her children. The language was formal and cold, but the meaning was clear. My legacy would be safe with the ones who'd stayed true. Samuel poured us both a cup of coffee as we finished. "You did the right thing, Ben," he said gently. "You protected your family, even when it cost you more than money." I nodded, staring out the office window at the city skyline. "You know, Samuel, I used to think the worst pain in life was losing Linda." But I think it's watching your own child make choices that tear a family apart. Still, at least Abby and the kids have a future. He smiled softly. And you have them. That afternoon, Abby and the kids joined me for dinner at the house. She brought a big pot of stew, her mother's recipe, and we all sat around the old oak table, sharing stories and laughter until the sun dipped low and the fireflies came out in the backyard. Madison read me her latest story about a brave knight and a lost puppy, while Henry insisted on showing me how fast he could run circles around the living room. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly present, no longer haunted by regrets or the bitterness of what Michael had done. Life had given me scars, but it had also given me a second chance to cherish the family I had left. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I stood in front of Linda's picture in the hallway. Her smile, warm as ever, seemed to say, "You did what you had to, Ben. Family isn't always easy. But love means doing the hard thing, even when it breaks your heart." I whispered a silent prayer, not for Michael to change, but for him to find peace wherever he was. I hoped that someday he might come to understand what he'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to become the man I'd always believed he could be. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Michael. It was short, written in a shaky hand, the words full of regret. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but he did say he was sorry. Sorry for the pain, for the greed, for letting his life spiral so far off course. He promised to use his time in prison to reflect and, if he was ever given another chance, to try to rebuild something good. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink, then tucked it away in Linda's old jewelry box. A reminder that even broken things can sometimes be mended, if only a little. Spring came at last, soft and full of new life. The dogwoods on Birch Lane blossomed, the air turning sweet with promise. Abby's children chased butterflies in the yard, their laughter floating up to the open windows. I tended the garden, just as Linda once had, pulling weeds and planting fresh seeds, each act a small vow to keep moving forward, to keep loving, no matter the risk. Some evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the sun set behind the old maples. The world felt steady again, changed forever, but still worth living in. I'd survived betrayal, loss, and heartbreak, but I'd found strength I never knew I had. And through it all, I'd learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you when everything else falls away. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, wondering how much you can endure, remember this. The worst storms can tear through your life and leave you raw, but they can also show you what's truly worth holding on to. And as for me, well, I still talk to Linda sometimes, especially on quiet nights. I tell her about Abby, about the kids, about the garden and the little joys that keep coming, even after all that's been lost. In the end, maybe that's the best anyone can hope for, not a perfect family, but a chance to protect what matters and to love without fear, one day at a time.